What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. This is part 2 of my conversation with you on 10 greatest black fighters' accomplishments per weight division. And this is a very special moment in boxing history. October 4th, 1940. Not only did Henry Armstrong attempt his 20th welterweight championship title defense against Pittsburgh's Fritzy Zivit, he came up short. But on the undercard was a Harlemite lightweight fighter who was a phenomenon. He would win in 1940 Golden Gloves in the lightweight division, and that would be his last amateur competition. He would then turn professional, and that was in Madison Square Garden. But when he turned professional Madison Square Garden. Why is that important? Because Ray Robinson would be the first black fighter in any weight division, in any building of Madison Square Garden, to professional debut his career in that building. He's the only black fighter in boxing history to be the first to open up the show, making his professional debut in Madison Square Garden. That is not talked about. That is not celebrated. That is a special moment in boxing history. 1920, 1946, Ray Robinson would become the 5th black welterweight champion in boxing history, defeating Ohio's Tommy Bell for the vacant New York SAC and NBA welterweight championship belt. What would take the luster off of that accomplishment was that Marty Servo, who was the actual champion, would decide to vacate the belt rather than face Ray Robinson. Because Ray Robinson defeated Marty Servo twice before this fight. And he decided not to fight him. He faced Rocky Graziano, and he stated that he's going to retire because Rocky Graziano broke his nose. But the reason was he did not want to face Ray Robinson once again. He knew he would not defeat him. He had an ego about him. Ray Robinson would then become the 5th black welterweight champion. And it took his lineage away because Ray Robinson was not the lineal welterweight champion. That's taken away from him. So the last black lineal welterweight champion is now Henry Armstrong. Had Marty Servo faced Ray Robinson in 1946, as he should have, Ray Robinson would have been the lineal welterweight champion when he would have defeated Marty Servo behind Henry Armstrong as a black welterweight champion. February 14th, 1951, Ray Robinson becomes the 3rd black middleweight champion, but this time it would be a lineal, undisputed middleweight championship contest. He would stop Jake LaMotta in 13 rounds. They fought in Chicago. Ray Robinson would now be the 3rd black middleweight champion. You would have Tiger Flowers in 26. You would have William Gorilla Jones. And then the great Sugar Ray Robinson. Jimmy Carter becomes the world lightweight champion, knocking out Ike Williams, May 25th, 1951. And he would knock him out in 14 rounds. He would then lose and win back the lightweight championship title. May 14th, 1952. On October 15th, 1952, he would win and lose to Laura Solis. Then again, March 5th, 1954, November 17th, 1954, he would win and lose to Patty DeMarco. Jimmy Carter remains the only 3-time unified, undisputed world lightweight champion in boxing history. August 24th, 1956. Joe Brown becomes old bones. He would become the lightweight champion of the world when he would defeat Wallace Bud Smith. Now, Bud Smith had taken the title away from Jimmy Carter, took it away from Ike Williams, took it away from Bob Montgomery, who would take it away from Bo Jack. I'm speaking the lineal line. And what was beautiful about that was that Joe Brown would have 12 title defenses, the most ever before Roberto Duran would break his record. And Joe Brown was such a master boxer that he would defend that title 12 times. August 24th, 1956, April 21st, 1962. He would eventually lose it to Carlos Ortiz, Las Vegas, Nevada. What an accomplishment. And that was a tough thing to do during that time. Joe Brown. I have him in my 10 greatest black lightweights of all time. What a hell of a fighter he was. Now, Georgie Pace out of Ohio would be the second black bantamweight champion in boxing history. The first one was Panama Al Brown. Ray Robinson would win and lose back the World Welterweight Championship, lineal undisputed middleweight champion, 4 times, becoming the only middleweight champion to this day be classified as a 5-time middleweight champion between 1951 and 1960, when he would lose his title finally to Paul Pender. Archie Moore became the 3rd black light heavyweight champion, lineal undisputed NBA New York SAC, December 17, 1952. He would defeat Joey Maxim in 15 rounds, and he would become a 10-year reign world champion before having his title stripped in 1961 and 1962. It would be the NBA and the New York SAC title. And shortly after that, the New York SAC would no longer be. It would now be the WBA. A disability fighter who couldn't hear and couldn't speak. His name was Eugene Harrison. He would lose his hearing, causing the Boxing Commission to create a 10-second rule red blinking light at New York Madison Square Garden, because he hit a man after the bell, and it was a big moment in time where they had to make changes for fighters who had that disability. And it was Eugene Harrison, who was a black fighter. To this day, the red blinking light for the last 10 seconds before the bell would ring would be created with Eugene Harrison. He's a very good middleweight. December 18th, 1942, Bo Jack becomes the second black lightweight champion since Joe Gans, May 12th, 1902, knocking out Frank Ernst in Fort Irwin. Bo Jack stops Tippy Larkin, 1942, in 3 rounds, becomes the New York SAC lightweight champion. And that would be behind Joe Gans. He would become a 2-time New York SAC lightweight champion. Until this day, Bo Jack is still the only fighter who would headline a card at Madison Square Garden the longest, 21 times. Ike Williams would become the second black undisputed lightweight champion since Joe Gans, August 4th, 1947, when he would defeat Bob Montgomery in Philadelphia, knocking him out in 6 rounds, becoming the New York SAC and the NBA ring championship title holder. April 18, 1945, he would stop Juan Jarita in 2 rounds, become the NBA lightweight champion in Mexico City. He would be the 5th black fighter to make that accomplishment, but he would be the 2nd black fighter behind Joe Gans to be the lineal undisputed world lightweight champion. July 10, 1951, England's former British middleweight champion. His name was Randy Turpin, and he would become the first black middleweight champion in boxing history of England. He defeated Sugar Ray Robinson, unified, undisputed, lineal world middleweight champion. And what was interesting about that, his brother Dick Turpin would become the first black fighter to win a title in England. And this all falls back to Lynn Johnson, who was denied the opportunity because of the color of his skin, an ounce of black blood in his body, to face Mickey Walker back in the 1930s. Lynn Johnson did something about it. He decided to get on the board to make changes to the Rule 24, which did not allow legally a black fighter to fight for a title. And it's because of Lynn Johnson is why Randy Turpin and Dick Turpin would get their shots. It's why Anthony Joshua and Nigel Benn, Frank Bruno, and many others from England would get a shot at a world title. Shout out to Lynn Johnson. But that's a great accomplishment of Randy Turpin. Now, Emil Griffis would become a 3-time welterweight champion, 2-time middleweight champion, and 1-time junior middleweight champion. He was a phenomenal fighter, was Emil Griffis, and he needs to be recognized for the accomplishments that he made. 1960 Rome Olympic Games, the light heavyweight champion, Cassius Clay, would win a gold medal. He was 22 years old in 1964 when he would take on Charles Sonny Liston. And he was stopped in 7 rounds. Charles Sonny Liston did not come out for the 8th round. And he would be one of 3 times undisputed heavyweight champion. You see, Muhammad Ali would become a 4-time heavyweight champion, but he was undisputed 3 times. When he would face Leon Spinks in 1978, the WBC was not on the line. So he wasn't undisputed at that time. But Muhammad Ali would be the first 4-time world heavyweight champion before Evander the Real Deal Holyfield would accomplish that. The very first time, 2 undisputed heavyweight champions would collide, March 8, 1971, would be at New York's Madison Square Garden. Smoking Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali won 15 rounds in New York's Madison Square Garden. It was considered to be the fight of the century. Now, Joe Louis would be the first black fighter of this entire country that would be depended upon to win a fight. It took place June 22nd, 1938, at New York's Yankee Stadium. It was against Germany's Black Uhlin, Max Schmeling. The entire country was behind Joe Louis, black and white, to win this victory. Although it was for different reasons, but it was for the same cause. For democracy, internally and externally. The black audience wanted Joe Louis to win because he symbolized what their struggles were. And the establishment wanted Joe Louis to win before the superior race and a superior country. But Joe Louis would be the first black fighter to fight for a specific country where they were depending on him. And he would knock out Max Schmeling in 1 round. Shout out to Joe Louis. Henry Armstrong would be the first 3-weight division simultaneous champion in boxing history. He would be the first fighter to accomplish that feat. Henry Armstrong was the 3rd black fighter to fight New York's Madison Square Garden and win a title. He would be the first black American featherweight champion in boxing history. He would be the first fighter to fight on a card that Mike Jacobs would have when he took over the New York Madison Square Garden. That was his first fight card and had Henry Armstrong on the card. Henry Armstrong would face Peter Cerrone that night and do the unthinkable. He would become the first American black featherweight champion in boxing history. The first black featherweight champion was George Dixon. We talked about him. The second black featherweight champion was from Cuba. His name was Kid Chocolate. But the third black featherweight champion would be Henry Armstrong. But the first black American featherweight champion would be Henry Armstrong. Henry Armstrong would also set the precedent, 1938, holding the featherweight champion, holding the welterweight champion, holding the lightweight champion. John Henry Lewis would hold the light heavyweight champion, and Joe Louis would hold the heavyweight championship. And all those titles were undisputed, and they were all lineal. And that's the first time black fighters would dominate boxing in that fashion. They didn't hold the middleweight championship belt because that was not going to be tolerated. Gorilla Jones would take on Marcel Theo, and he would be robbed because Marcel Theo would claim a foul, and Gorilla Jones would lose his title on a foul. You had other great black fighters such as Sugar Ray Leonard, who turned professional in 1977. You would have fighters such as Tommy Hearns, who was the first fighter, 4-time, 5-time champion. You would have Marvelous Marvin Hagler, 7.5-year reign as middleweight champion. Larry Holmes, 20 title defenses, 7.5-year reign. Both those men turned professional in 1973. You'd have so many great accomplishments. Deontay Wilder, tying Muhammad Ali's record, 10 title defenses. Muhammad Ali would have 10 title defenses. Shout out to Larry Holmes and Ernie Shavers. Kenny Norton. Kenny Norton and Larry Holmes would have one of the greatest fights, the greatest 15-round competition, but one of the greatest fights in world championship history in 1978. Amazing. You would have Donald Curry, Mike the Body Snatcher McCallum, Andre Ward, Charlo Brothers, Earl Spence and Terrence Crawford, Devin Haney, Tank Davis. You would have fighters such as Demetrius Andres. Some of the great black fighters who have made accomplishments in the 1980s and 1990s. James Lights Out Tony, and Roy Jones Jr., Evander Real Deal Holyfield, Iron Mike Tyson, Poison Jr. Jones, and Kevin Flush and Flash Kelly. Bernard the Executioner Hopkins, what a fighter he was. Michael Dynamite Dokes. You know, as you think back and you look at some of the fighters who don't quite get the appreciation that they deserve. But then you have fighters such as Anthony Joshua and Frank Bruno and Nigel Benn. All superb fighters. Sometimes fighters come up in an era where either they don't match well with other fighters or their personalities don't equivalent to other fighters, but they're all fighters. Roger Mayweather, Cornelius Botha Edwards, Rocky Lockridge. You had so many of them. I did a video on Floyd Mayweather, what accomplishments he made. But this all stems back from Georgie Benton and Reuben Hurricane Carter, and Bobby Green. Goes back as far as Dave Holly, who's the master in creation of the shoulder roll. Kid Gavilan, Johnny Saxton of Newark, New Jersey. You had Johnny Bratton out of Chicago, who was known as the Honey Boy. Spiderweb and Bobby Boyd. Sandy Sadler and Jimmy Carter. So many great fighters. And their accomplishments are overshadowed. I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. All great fights, all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Thanks for spending some time with me celebrating some of the black fighters who I don't believe get as much credit as they deserve to help this great sport. See you next time. Peace. Before I sign off, I want to definitely recognize the Spinks brothers, Michael and Leon. I want to recognize Matthew Saad Muhammad, Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, the Davidson brothers, Marvin Johnson, Adrian Broner, Jeff Chandler, phenomenal fighter out of Philadelphia, Calvin Grove, Kid Akeem, R.I.P. to him, and Michael second to none, Frank Tate, Virgil Hill. Peace.